Marla Jensen stood at the edge of the military base, small and unassuming, blending into the background as if she were just another piece of the scenery. She wasn't in uniform like the soldiers marching past her. Instead, she wore the same practical attire every day: a plain shirt, cargo pants, and sturdy boots. The only indicator of her position was the Support Logistics badge pinned to her chest. Despite the pivotal role she played, no one gave her a second glance. Her days were filled with the unglamorous tasks of maintaining equipment, organizing supplies, and ensuring that the base ran smoothly. But her name was seldom remembered by anyone. The young soldiers often passed her by, offering only a quick, dismissive glance. They'd laugh among themselves, making assumptions about her. She probably worked in a coffee shop before this, one would say. Maybe she's a part-time artist. You know, like those hipster types. Another would joke. Another. They didn't bother to learn her name or consider the work she did. To them, Marla was nothing more than the person who fixed their broken equipment or delivered supplies, someone who existed solely in the background, useful when needed but invisible otherwise. Every day, she moved quietly through the base, never drawing attention to herself. When something broke, she was there to fix it. Whether it was a malfunctioning rifle scope or an inventory mistake, she handled it with quiet precision. Her movements were swift but deliberate, almost as if she had done the same tasks 1,000 times before. Soldiers would pass her, not even slowing down, too busy with their own concerns to notice the skill it took to make those repairs. Yet, she never complained or asked for acknowledgement. It was simply what needed to be done, and she did it without fanfare. As Marla worked, she overheard the whispers, the snickers, the occasional joke about her attire or her lack of a real military job. They saw a woman who didn't fit the usual mold, someone who didn't raise her voice or make waves. She wasn't like the other soldiers who wore their ranks proudly, making sure everyone knew who they were. No, Marla preferred the quiet. She didn't need recognition, and she certainly didn't seek the spotlight. Instead, she found purpose in the small victories, the weapon that worked again, the supplies that were always in the right place, the base that kept running efficiently because of her work. Despite being overlooked by most, there was an undeniable calmness to Marla. Her presence was like a shadow in the corner of a room, always there but rarely noticed. Yet, those who watched closely saw something more. There was an ease with which she handled everything, a level of focus and precision that suggested there was much more to her than the job title implied. But, to the soldiers around her, she was just another part of the scenery, a quiet worker in the background who would never make it into their stories of heroism and valor. They didn't see the depth behind her silence, the skill beneath her simplicity. In the quiet moments when she was left alone with her thoughts, Marla couldn't help but wonder if anyone would ever truly understand her. She had chosen this life, after all, not because she lacked ambition, but because she wanted something more, something deeper than the constant need for recognition. But she couldn't deny the ache of invisibility. Would they ever see her for who she really was, or would she remain an enigma? A woman whose extraordinary abilities were hidden behind the most ordinary of exteriors. The truth about Marla remained buried, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. For now, she moved through the base with quiet purpose, a constant presence that no one fully understood. But those who had the patience to look a little deeper might someday discover that Marla Jensen was not the ordinary woman they thought her to be. Her story had yet to unfold, and the layers of her past were waiting for someone brave enough to peel them back. For now, though, she simply continued her work one task at a time, unnoticed but never truly forgotten. Marla Jensen moved quietly through the military base, her movements precise and deliberate. She wasn't in the spotlight, never seeking attention, but the way she handled tasks set her apart from the others. When a rifle was broken or an item in the inventory was malfunctioning, Marla could fix it with almost surgical accuracy. Soldiers often passed by her, assuming she was just another logistics worker, following orders. They didn't notice the way her hands moved with such expertise, as if she had spent countless hours honing this craft. To them, she was just someone who took care of equipment, nothing special, just another cog in the machine. One day, during a routine maintenance check, a young soldier walked up to her, holding a rifle with a malfunctioning sight. He asked her to take a look, expecting a quick fix. As he handed it over, he made a joke. "Hope you're not just guessing." "Huh." Marla didn't respond. She took the rifle into her hands, examining it closely. Without a word, she adjusted the scope, tightening the screws and realigning the sight. Within moments, the rifle was as good as new. The soldier, not bothering to thank her, grabbed it back, muttering, "Lucky guess." But Marla didn't mind. She returned to her work, undisturbed by the lack of recognition. However, Lieutenant Colonel Rowan was watching. He had seen this same scenario play out several times, soldiers bringing Marla their malfunctioning gear, and her fixing it with quiet precision. Unlike the others, Rowan noticed the way she handled the equipment. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. Each movement was deliberate, practiced. It was something more than just following orders. He had been around long enough to recognize when someone had more experience than they were letting on, and Marla's effortless skill piqued his curiosity. He decided to pay closer attention. Over the next few weeks, Rowan observed Marla as she went about her daily tasks. She was always in the background, yet always seemed to know exactly where to be and what needed fixing. She handled rifles, scopes, radios, and other military equipment as though it were second nature. The soldiers around her might have written her off as nothing more than a logistics worker, but Rowan began to suspect that her expertise went far beyond the confines of a simple job description. One afternoon, during a routine weapon inspection, Rowan watched as Marla adjusted the scope on a sniper rifle. The young soldier who had requested the adjustment stood by, expecting her to fumble with it like most people would. Instead, Marla moved with the ease of someone who had performed the task thousands of times before. Her fingers adjusted the dial with expert precision, making the rifle sight perfect in mere moments. The soldier, surprised but too proud to show it, muttered a half-hearted "thanks" before walking away. But Rowan, now more intrigued than ever, knew there was something more to this woman. The puzzle pieces were slowly coming together in his mind. He had seen her work before, but never truly paid attention. Now, as he observed her with fresh eyes, he saw the quiet confidence in her every movement. The precision with which she handled each piece of equipment seemed to tell a story, one that didn't match up with the image of the meek, unnoticed logistics worker everyone else saw. Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important, something hidden beneath Marla's calm and quiet demeanor. But what could it be? As days passed, his fascination with Marla grew. Her skills weren't just technical, they were intuitive, almost second nature. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was as though she knew exactly how every piece of gear should work, as if she had been trained in ways the others couldn't comprehend. But when he asked her about her background, Marla would always give him a short, nonchalant answer. There was nothing remarkable in the information on her file, just the usual military documentation. The more Rowan looked into her emotionalstories, the more he realized that something was missing, a gap in the records that only deepened the mystery. With each passing day, Rowan became more determined to uncover the truth. There was no way someone with such a high level of expertise could just be a logistics worker. The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together, and that was exactly what intrigued him. The more he watched, the more he felt there was more to Marla than anyone could have imagined. There was something extraordinary about her, but it was still hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. Lieutenant Colonel Rowan sat at his desk late one evening, sifting through the endless digital files of base personnel. He had already reviewed Marla's records once before, dismissing them as the kind of mundane paperwork one would expect from a logistics worker. But now, with his curiosity piqued, he was diving deeper, looking for anything that would explain the odd precision in her work. It wasn't just her efficiency that had caught his attention. There was something about the way she handled herself, like she knew things that others didn't, had seen things that were beyond the scope of a regular soldier. As Rowan scrolled through the pages of Marla's file, his eyes caught strange gaps, significant gaps. There was little information about her past before she joined the military, and what was there was either heavily redacted or incomplete. Her service record was a blur, and her contact information was marked as unavailable. It was as if her entire history had been erased. But that wasn't what stood out most. It was the file's final note: classified, no access granted. Then it happened. Rowan's gaze shifted to a new photo of Marla that had been attached to her record. In the image, her sleeve was rolled up, revealing a tattoo on her forearm. It was faint, barely visible under the dim light of the photo. But Rowan recognized it immediately. That symbol and intricate design of geometric shapes with a hidden meaning was the symbol of Omega Force, an ultra-secretive special operations unit that existed outside of official military channels. The Omega Force logo was meant to be hidden, erased from any public record. Rowan's heart skipped a beat as he realized what this meant. Marla was not just any logistics worker. She was connected to something far darker and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The tattoo's revelation sent a surge of adrenaline through Rowan's veins. He leaned forward in his chair, his mind racing. Omega Force was a legend, a ghost unit shrouded in mystery. It was known for carrying out the most dangerous and sensitive missions in the military, with no acknowledgement and no recognition, no medals, no records. If you were part of Omega Force, you were erased from history once the mission was completed. The public didn't even know it existed. But Rowan had heard whispers. He had heard stories in the bars, rumors of missions that defied the odds, of soldiers who completed the impossible and disappeared without a trace. Rowan had always believed these stories were just that, rumors. But now, staring at Marla's tattoo, he wasn't so sure. The symbols on her arm could mean only one thing: she had been a part of that world. He could feel the tension building, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. This was no longer about a logistics worker who fixed weapons in the background. This was about someone who had been part of a unit that had operated in the shadows, with missions that could never be discussed. Marla's past was something far more complex than anyone, including herself, had ever let on. With the tattoo firmly in his mind, Rowan opened a new window on his computer and started a more detailed search. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, a sense of unease growing within him. As he typed in the search for any records of Omega Force, the system responded with a simple warning: access denied. It was clear that the military had taken every precaution to ensure that no information about Omega Force would be made public. Rowan's pulse quickened, but his determination only deepened. He wasn't going to stop here. Hours passed as Rowan continued to dig. Every lead he followed seemed to vanish, and every document he uncovered led to more dead ends. He accessed archived files from classified military operations, but each time he found something remotely related to Omega Force, the information was redacted or wiped clean. The deeper he dug, the more his own files seemed to be blocked. Someone high up had gone to great lengths to bury the truth about Omega Force. Yet, despite all the secrecy and the silence, something about Marla seemed to contradict the quiet life she now led. Her expertise was too sharp, too precise for someone who had just been a logistics worker. Rowan knew that people didn't learn those kinds of skills from fixing equipment. These were skills honed under pressure, skills developed in combat. She had the calm of a seasoned operative, not the nervousness of someone who had never faced danger. There was a depth to Marla, a history that went far beyond her role at the base. Rowan felt a growing sense of urgency. The tattoo, the gaps in her file, the silence, it all pointed to a woman who had once been a part of something much bigger than the world around her. But why had she left it behind? Why had she chosen to vanish into the shadows, taking on a role that seemed so far removed from her true identity? The more Rowan investigated, the more questions he had, and the less he seemed to understand. And yet, despite the mystery, one thing was clear to him now. Marla Jensen was far from ordinary. She was someone with a past that demanded to be uncovered, a past that might just explain everything about her quiet efficiency, her extraordinary skills, and why she chose to live in the shadows. The tattoo was just the beginning. The truth, Rowan knew, was far more dangerous and far more important than he could have imagined. Omega Force was a name that existed only in whispered conversations, a ghost unit that the public had no knowledge of. It was known for its top-secret operations, carried out by an elite group of soldiers who were tasked with high-risk missions that others would never dare to take on. Their operations were classified to such an extent that not even the highest-ranking officials could access full records. For all intents and purposes, Omega Force didn't exist. Yet, it had been responsible for some of the most dangerous and successful military missions of the past decade, missions that no one could talk about. But everyone knew about if they were paying attention. Marla Jensen was a crucial member of this unit. Her name, like the unit she belonged to, was erased from all official records. The missions she had participated in were so highly classified that they weren't even mentioned in the debriefing reports that filtered through military channels. But Rowan knew one thing for sure: the tattoo on Marla's arm was not just a symbol of some forgotten unit. It was a marker of something far more significant. It was a symbol of the ghosts that carried out missions no one else could handle. Missions that were beyond the reach of conventional warfare. Rowan began to piece together the fragments of Marla's involvement. One evening, he found an archived briefing that was buried deep within military databases. The mission, carried out in the mountains of Afghanistan, was a rescue operation. A group of hostages, taken by a notorious terrorist cell, was being held in an isolated compound, and the odds of survival were slim. The operation was classified as a suicide mission. Officially, it had been deemed too dangerous to attempt, but someone had tried it anyway, Omega Force. The mission was carried out with precision and expertise, and it was successful. The hostages were freed, and the terrorists were neutralized. No one outside of the unit knew it had even happened. Another mission Marla had been a part of took place in the heart of the Middle East. A high-ranking official had been captured by an extremist group, and they planned to execute him publicly. The intelligence was bleak. The window to rescue him was closing rapidly. Only Omega Force had the training and ability to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold, recover the official, and escape undetected. Marla was part of that operation too. The mission was flawless, so flawless that it didn't make the news. And the official was saved without the public ever knowing the full extent of the danger. Marla's role in that operation was a testament to the quiet resolve of someone who had seen and done things that others would never understand. Each mission in Marla's past seemed more impossible than the last. Rowan dug deeper into the files, finding glimpses of operations that were so dangerous. They made his heart race just reading about them. There were stories of sniper teams taking out targets from miles away, of covert infiltrations into enemy territory, and of missions that required split-second decisions with no room for error. Each operation was a success, and each one had left no trace. No one could ever know who had been involved. No medals were awarded. No recognition given. And the stories would never make the history books. Omega Force had no legacy, only results. Rowan's mind reeled. How could someone like Marla, quiet, reserved, and unassuming, have been a part of something so extraordinary? Every clue he uncovered made him respect her more. But it also left him with more questions. Why had she left that life behind? Why had she chosen to work in logistics, in a role that couldn't be further from the field of battle? Was she trying to escape from a past that would never let her go? Or was she simply living a life that no one could understand? Hidden in plain sight. The weight of Marla's past hung heavily on Rowan as he realized that the woman he had been watching was no ordinary soldier. She had carried out missions that were so classified, so secret, that they would never be acknowledged by anyone outside the circle of Omega Force. The respect Rowan had for her grew with every piece of information he uncovered. But there was also a deep sense of mystery surrounding Marla. What was she running from? And what did she hope to achieve by living in the shadows? Rowan's obsession with uncovering the truth about Marla grew with each passing day. He knew he had only scratched the surface. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. But he couldn't stop himself. Marla's past was a puzzle, and he was determined to put the pieces together. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that the woman who had been working in the background, unnoticed by everyone, had a past that was more powerful and dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Marla Jensen was a constant presence at the military base, quietly moving through her day with a sense of calm purpose that few could understand. She wasn't the type to stand out in a crowd. Her role was important. Yet, she never demanded attention or recognition for the work she did. She fixed weapons, ensured that supplies were restocked, and completed tasks with such precision that it almost seemed effortless. It was as if everything she touched turned out perfectly. And yet, there was nothing extraordinary about her, at least in the eyes of the others. The soldiers around her took little notice of the skill that underpinned her every move. They saw her as nothing more than the logistics person, a necessary part of the team, but not someone to be admired. Marla was content with this. She had learned long ago that the work itself was enough, that her satisfaction came from knowing she had done her job well, not from accolades or praise. There was peace in the simplicity of it all, in the quiet repetition of her tasks. But despite her self-contained world, something about her skill set suggested there was more to her than met the eye. One day, during a sniper training exercise, things began to change. A young soldier, struggling to adjust his rifle scope, called out for help. Marla happened to be nearby, as she often was, checking equipment and making sure the soldiers had everything they needed. When she approached him, he barely looked up. "Can you fix this for me?" "The scope's off," he asked. She nodded silently, taking the rifle from his hands. The way she held it, the way she studied the sight, was methodical, almost clinical. In a few short movements, Marla adjusted the scope, her hands working with the precision of someone who had done it hundreds of times before. She didn't say a word, but the soldier couldn't help but stare as she handed the rifle back to him. "How did you do that?" the soldier asked, surprised. "It's perfect now." Marla simply nodded, not seeking any recognition. She returned to her duties, but her actions lingered in the air. The young soldier was left standing there, staring after her, a sense of awe creeping in. He had seen snipers adjust their scopes with skill, but never with this level of expertise. It was as if She had been trained for something far more advanced than what her role on the base suggested. She had a quiet confidence, a calm assurance that couldn't be ignored once you noticed it. The other soldiers began to talk. They started noticing the small things that Marla did so effortlessly, things that were well beyond the usual scope of a logistics worker. She moved through the equipment like a seasoned professional, fixing what needed fixing, all while maintaining an air of composure that made her seem both invisible and indispensable. The more they saw, the more they began to realize that Marla wasn't just someone who could fix a broken rifle. There was an undeniable sense of military precision in everything she did. Lieutenant Colonel Rowan, who had been observing from a distance, began to piece the puzzle together. He had watched her adjust the scope and seen the way the soldiers reacted. It wasn't just the mechanics of it. Her calm, focused demeanor in a high-pressure situation stood out. He had been around long enough to recognize that Marla's behavior wasn't that of an ordinary support worker. Something about her movement suggested years of experience under intense circumstances. Rowan's curiosity grew. She wasn't just fixing things. She was doing it with the kind of expertise that came from a life in the field. A life where quick thinking and steady hands were the difference between life and death. As the days passed, Rowan's interest in Marla grew. He watched her work and listened to the way the other soldiers spoke about her. They had begun to look at her differently, not with mockery, but with respect. They recognized her quiet strength. The kind of strength that didn't need to be shouted or proclaimed. Marla's abilities were no longer a joke to them. They were something to be admired, even if they didn't fully understand where those abilities had come from. Despite this, Marla never sought their admiration. She didn't ask for it. She simply did her job. She worked without fanfare, without the need for acknowledgement. She had learned, perhaps from years of experience, that the work itself was its own reward. There was no need for anything else. The soldiers may have finally noticed her, but for Marla, that recognition wasn't necessary. She had a deeper understanding of what mattered, of what true strength was, and for her, that strength lay in the quiet moments, in the small, unnoticed actions that made everything else work. Rowan, however, couldn't let it go. He was beginning to see that Marla was no ordinary woman. Her calm, her precision, her almost effortless mastery of the tools and equipment, it all pointed to something far greater than what she let on. What was her past? What had she seen? What had she done to acquire these skills? The more Rowan thought about it, the more he realized that Marla was hiding something important, something that could change the way everyone saw her, but she wasn't ready to share it. Not yet. For now. Marla continued to live in the background, a silent hero, unnoticed, but essential. The days following Marla's quiet display of extraordinary skill were filled with whispers and confusion. The soldiers who had once mocked her began to look at her with a new sense of curiosity, then awe. They had watched her move through their lives like a shadow, unnoticed, but always essential. But now, after that sniper training exercise and the quiet precision with which she adjusted the rifle scope, they began to realize something they had missed for so long. Marla wasn't just a logistics worker. She was far more than that. They had only seen the surface, the woman who fixed rifles, organized supplies, and quietly made the base run smoothly. But there was a deeper story beneath the calm exterior, one that none of them had ever considered. Lieutenant Colonel Rowan had spent weeks unraveling the mystery of Marla's past, and with every new discovery, his respect for her grew. He uncovered more and more pieces of her history, each one revealing just how much she had hidden. Omega Force Marla had been part of that legendary secret unit, a unit so classified that its existence had been denied by the military itself. Her name, like the names of all Omega Force members, had been erased from history. Every operation, every mission, every life she had saved was buried beneath layers of secrecy. The deeper Rowan dug, the more he realized how much Marla had sacrificed to live the life she did now. She had been a ghost, a phantom, part of a unit that was meant to disappear. Rowan knew that the truth about Marla could change everything. It was the kind of revelation that could upend the way people saw her, and the way they saw the very nature of strength. He had the information, the undeniable proof of her past. But when he tried to confront her with it, to ask her to speak about her former life, she remained silent. She refused to talk, to acknowledge the heroics that had once been hers. Marla had made her choice long ago to live quietly, to stay in the shadows, and to never seek recognition for the things she had done. She didn't need it. For her, the work itself had been enough. The mission, the people she had helped, the lives she had saved, those were the things that mattered. One morning, long before the sun had risen, Marla quietly packed her things and left the base. No one saw her go. She left as silently as she had arrived. Her departure, a quiet echo in the history of the base. All that remained were the small signs of her presence, the perfectly organized supplies, the weapons that worked flawlessly, the equipment that had been expertly maintained. She had left behind more than just an empty room. She had left a legacy, one that no one had truly understood until she was gone. And in the quiet stillness of the base, the soldiers began to realize that they had underestimated her. Later that day, a soldier discovered something Marla had left behind: a letter. It was brief, simple, and unsigned. It was addressed to all of them, the soldiers who had once overlooked her, and it read, "True strength doesn't require recognition. It lies in the ability to do what is needed, no matter who is watching. Don't judge anyone by the uniform they wear or don't wear. The strongest people are often the ones who choose not to show their strength." The soldiers stood in silence, reading her words, and for the first time, they understood. Marla, the woman they had once mocked, had been a hero in her own right, quiet, unassuming, and extraordinary in ways they had never expected. As the days passed, the base was never quite the same. The soldiers, now aware of Marla's hidden past, began to respect her memory in ways they had never respected her when she was there. They spoke in hushed tones about her, about the things they had never known, and the legend she had quietly built through her actions, not her words. The more they learned about Omega Force, the more they realized how much they had taken for granted. Marla's impact could not be erased, even though she had chosen to disappear. Her legacy, though invisible to most, had left its mark on each of them. And they would never forget the quiet hero who had once walked among them. The realization was slow, but it was profound. Marla had shown them the power of humility, the strength of silence, and the unspoken depth of those who choose to work quietly in the background. The soldiers learned that the most valuable people are often the ones who do not seek attention, who do not demand accolades, but who quietly make everything possible. And in the absence of Marla Jensen, they finally understood that she had been more than just a logistics worker. She had been a silent force, a true hero whose story would never be told, but whose impact would be felt forever. After Marla's departure, the base seemed quieter, as if a vital part of it had vanished without a trace. At first, the soldiers went about their routines, unaware of the subtle but profound change that had taken place. But as the days passed, they began to reflect on her absence, and something in the air shifted. They started to notice things that had once been invisible, the way the equipment always worked perfectly, the way supplies were never late, and how things just seemed to function smoothly when Marla was around. She had been the silent backbone of the entire operation, the one who made sure everything was in place. Yet she had never once sought praise or recognition. Some of the younger soldiers, who had once made jokes about her and mocked her quiet nature, began to feel a deep sense of regret. They had dismissed her as nothing more than a logistical worker, a role that seemed insignificant compared to the larger-than-life images of soldiers in the field. They had never once considered that there was more to Marla than met the eye. But now, as they looked back, they realized how wrong they had been. Marla wasn't just a woman who fixed rifles and checked inventories. She was the glue that held everything together. The one who made sure that when the time came for action, the soldiers would have everything they needed to succeed. As the days wore on, rumors started to spread around the base. Whispers about Omega Force, the ultra-secretive unit that Marla had been a part of, made their way into the conversations of the soldiers. Some had heard the stories, the ones that circulated in hushed tones in the corners of military bars, the tales of impossible missions, of soldiers who disappeared and never returned. The more the soldiers learned about Omega Force, the more they came to understand just how extraordinary Marla's past had been. She had been a part of something that very few knew about, let alone understood. And the more they reflected on her skills, the more they realized that Marla wasn't just an unremarkable logistics worker. She had been a quiet legend, someone whose contributions could never truly be acknowledged in public. The soldiers began to speak of Marla with a newfound respect. They remembered her calm, her precision, and the way she had always carried herself with quiet dignity. They saw now that true strength wasn't about the medals or the uniforms that some soldiers wore. It wasn't about who got the recognition or the glory. It was about doing the right thing when no one was watching, about serving in a way that didn't seek attention. Marla had been a model of that strength, embodying the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed in the noise of the battlefield. One afternoon, as the soldiers gathered for a routine briefing, the atmosphere felt different. The absence of Marla's presence hung over them like a shadow. Without her, the base seemed a little less organized, a little less steady. They had taken her contributions for granted, never truly appreciating her until she was gone. They didn't have the chance to thank her or recognize her efforts, but they could honor her legacy in the only way they knew how, by living up to the standards she had set. In a small ceremony, the soldiers came together to acknowledge Marla's silent service. They didn't have the luxury of medals or formal recognition, but they didn't need those things to show their respect. Some soldiers wrote down their thoughts, sharing what Marla had taught them without ever saying a word. They talked about the way she had quietly influenced the base, the way her actions had shaped the environment without anyone noticing until it was too late. In their hearts, they knew that Marla had given them more than they could ever repay. As the ceremony ended, one soldier placed a small token in the center of the room, a simple patch with the Omega Force symbol, the same one that had been on Marla's arm. It was a tribute to her legacy, a symbol of the silent strength she had embodied. It wasn't much, but it was all they could offer. The soldiers stood in silence, honoring the woman who had been far more than they ever realized. And so, Marla's legacy lived on, not in the grand ceremonies or the loud applause of public recognition, but in the hearts of those who had worked alongside her. She had shown them what true strength looked like, not in the boisterous or the obvious, but in the quiet acts of service that built the foundation for everything else. Her impact was permanent, not because of anything she had done to seek acknowledgement, but because of the way she had influenced those around her, changing their perceptions of leadership and strength. Marla had taught them that real heroes weren't always the ones who wore uniforms or stood on podiums. Sometimes, they were the ones who worked in the shadows, whose names would never be written in history books, but whose contributions would never be forgotten by those who had been touched by their work. In the days after Marla's departure, the soldiers found themselves reflecting on everything they had overlooked during her time on the base. It wasn't just the sudden realization of her skills and past, but something deeper, a profound understanding that had only come to them after she was gone. They had always thought that strength was something that needed to be seen, something that needed to be loud and proud, something that could only be appreciated if it stood out. But Marla had shown them a different kind of strength, one that didn't ask for applause, one that was quiet, subtle, and powerful in ways they hadn't even imagined. As they reflected on her life, they began to see that real strength wasn't about drawing attention to oneself. It wasn't about being the loudest or the most visible. Marla's quiet demeanor, her calm and unassuming presence, had hidden an extraordinary power. She had taught them that true strength lay in knowing when to act, when to stay silent, and when to serve others without seeking recognition. She had embodied the kind of strength that went unnoticed. That wasn't for show, but that made everything else possible. And in that silence, there was more force, more courage, than any display of power or bravado could ever convey. The soldiers began to realize the depth of their mistake. They had mocked her for being quiet, for staying in the background. They had misunderstood her humility, thinking it was a sign of weakness. Now, they understood that it was the strength of self-awareness, the strength of knowing that you didn't need to prove yourself to anyone. And, in the absence of Marla's physical presence, her influence grew stronger. Her legacy was no longer about what she had done in the shadows, but about how she had changed the soldiers' perspectives on strength and leadership. They saw her now for who she truly was, a silent hero who had quietly shaped the base, who had left an indelible mark on their lives, and whose lessons would stay with them forever. One evening, as the sun began to set, a young sergeant sat alone in the barracks, a journal open in front of him. His pen hovered above the page as he thought about Marla, about the way he had once mocked her, the way he had underestimated her. He felt a pang of regret, a weight of realization pressing on his chest. The words began to flow from his pen, the ink capturing the truth he hadn't been able to see before. "I wasn't qualified to mock her," he wrote. "I didn't understand what she was doing, what she had done. Now, I see she was stronger than any of us could have ever known." The words were simple, but they carried a deep, quiet truth. Marla had been the one who had taught him what true strength meant. It wasn't about the uniform, the rank, or the weapons. It was about the quiet moments, the behind-the-scenes actions, and the strength to serve without expectation. As the soldiers continued their reflections, they realized how much Marla's absence had changed the way they viewed the world. The respect for her work, for the silent power she had embodied, began to grow. They recognized that the quietest people often had the greatest strength. Those who stayed in the background, who didn't seek the spotlight, were often the ones who held everything together. They had learned that heroes weren't always the ones who wore medals or had their names in lights. Sometimes, heroes were the ones who worked tirelessly, invisibly, to make everything else work. And Marla had been a hero, in the truest sense of the word. Her strength had never been about showing off. It had always been about getting the job done, making sure others could succeed, and doing it without ever asking for recognition. In the days that followed, the soldiers carried a new understanding with them. They approached their work with a sense of humility and respect. knowing that the people who truly made a difference often went unnoticed. Marla's legacy lived on, not in the form of medals or public accolades, but in the way her lessons had shaped the soldiers' hearts and minds. They would never forget her, not just because of what she had done, but because of how she had lived. She had shown them the power of silence, the strength that came from within, and the importance of working quietly behind the scenes to make everything else possible. Marla's impact was not measured by the medals she never received or the recognition she never sought. It was measured by the way she had changed the lives of those around her, by the respect she had earned in the quietest way possible. Her legacy, though not written in any official record, lived on in every soldier who had come to understand the true nature of strength. They would carry her lesson with them forever. Strength doesn't need to shout to be heard. And sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who choose not to prove anything at all.